within the. Isn't that one of the FEMA allowances?
That sounds right.
Yeah, Clifton, could you restate that? And everyone, I wasn't sure if the meeting was properly recording, so I just instructed the meeting to do so. So you may have received a notice on that. Clifton, could you state that again?
I'm familiar that I think it's the FEMA regulations, but I think we state it also that if there's a natural disaster, you're basically exempt from rebuilding to FEMA requirements if you rebuild in kind, but you have to apply for the reconstruction within, I think, 90 days.
All right, so let me shed some light on
that. I'd have to find the specific language, but
yeah,
that's my understanding of it.
Let me shed some light on that. You have to rebuild per the code requirements, but you are exempted from having to pull a new special permit or any other permit for the structure. So you can rebuild as of right, but you have to rebuild per the new building code requirements. And the new building code requirements, if they require something that is otherwise not currently allowed by the regulations, there's an exemption that allows you to build that without having to get a new permit or variance or anything like that. So that's what we allow, but you still have to rebuild per the new building code requirements.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Yeah. Ben, I don't know if we satisfied your answer or not. You have your hand raised.
I forgot to lower it. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. Anyone else have any other thoughts on this or questions?
I guess my only question, and given this is Clifton, my only question would be, what are other coastal communities in Connecticut using as their look back period? Is one
varies.
Standard or?
Yeah, 1 year is very common. 3 and 5 years, 2, 3, 5 years are common. One of the communities, I forget which one, is in perpetuity, basically as long as you could look back. Only one community, I think, has forever look back period. So we are on the definitely on the lower end at 1 year. And 1 year is the minimum. You can have higher, but 1 year is the minimum with respect to FEMA regulations.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that if, neighboring communities are, doing 2 or 3 or 4 years, then it might be worth finding out those just, in our local region.
Yep, I can share that information.
Maybe that way we can.
Sure.
Maybe that way we can peg ourselves something similar to nearby towns.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, this is Ben Philbrook again. And as always a compromiser, I was going to suggest we go to 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah, but this is Ryan. I think that's a good compromise as well.
Okay, so I'll make a note, 3 years ? But we'll also take a look at what other communities are doing. It'd obviously be more defensible if most communities are doing 3 years per se. All right, very good. I think we've adequately covered this tonight. I need to come back to you with a little more homework. So let's just keep revisiting this until we're agreed on how we want to move forward, and then we'll add it to our recommended amendments for the work that we did over the past few months. Okay, let's move forward. So we're here tonight primarily to talk about your residential zoning districts. Your residential districts, there they are on the map to the right, all in color. And so the white areas, with the exception of the Long Island Sound and the surrounding towns, the white areas within your town are non-residential districts. And so I think you can plainly see that your residential districts cover about 90% of the town. So your residential community, even though you've got some real core areas of village commercial and some outlying areas of commercial / industrial, you're mostly a residential community in terms of geography and share of town. And those districts range. We got 9 different exclusively residential districts. Now you do have some other districts, some floating zone type districts and mixed use districts that allow for residential development. But in terms of your primarily or exclusively residential districts, you have 9 of them. And they all have some similarities, but they vary. And they vary in terms of the type of housing they allow and the density that is allowed. And I'll walk you through that step by step. And ultimately, what I'd like to do is have a conversation about, does this work as it should? Are things in balance now, or are the residential regulations too restrictive, not allowing for the type of housing that Stonington may need? And so that's where we're going with all this. All right. So let's start out. And at the very beginning of our work about 1.5 years ago, I walked you all through, we walked through these residential districts just to kind of get a feel for how they differ. So I'd like to revisit that. And what we've done to this is we've also added some mapping to help guide us along. And I think someone just tried to enter the meeting, so I'll just make sure. Oh, here's Bennett. I'm going to make sure we let Bennett in. All right. So the GBR 130, Greenbelt Residential, is one of your least dense districts. The purpose of it is, primarily to protect some valuable open space land and natural resources in that part of the town. So it allows for very low density residential development, primarily on the northernmost parts of the town, but extending down to some areas further south. It is very, and I'm going to use these terms restrictive and permissive a lot tonight. It is very restrictive with respect to the types of principal residential uses that are allowed. There are 2 types: single family and community residence. And you all know what single family is. Community residence is a type of residence often referred to as a group home that the state has told us we have to allow those residences anywhere we allow single family. And there's some guardrails around that, but basically, so you're going to see community residence all throughout, and that's only because we are required to allow for group homes or community residences wherever single family homes are allowed. Okay. So basically what we're talking about here is a single family development type district, and a very low density one as well. So if we take a look at the map, the GBR 130 covers a significant area of town, and mostly, entirely north of Route 1, the Post Road, mostly north of 95, but some areas extending below 95 as well. So it's a very big area. It's effective at preserving a lot of the open space, forest cover in that area by requiring 130,000 square foot lot size, which is about 3 acres. Okay, so I'm going to walk through each of these districts one by one. RC 120 is very similar to the Greenbelt 130 district. It's just coastal. For whatever reason, it's 10,000 square foot less. Why they couldn't just both be 120, I don't know, but it is. So it's still a very large lot, so close to 3 acres, basically. Once again, exclusively single family homes are permitted in this district as a principal residential uses. All of these residential districts also allow for other types of uses, and it varies a little bit, and I'll show you what those are, including institutional uses like churches or schools, agricultural uses, But with respect to principal residential uses, the RC 120 and the Greenbelt 130 district allow just single family residences. All right. And we take a look at the geographic extents. It covers less of the town than the GB 130, but still some very large swaths. And I think, as you'll see, it's intended to protect coastal areas by requiring very large lot sizes and being very strict about the types of uses allowed. And there are some other controls as well. By example, in this district, the maximum building height is 25 feet. It's very restrictive, whereas in other residential districts, it's 30 or 35. So a fairly restrictive district, and associated almost completely with coastal areas. And excuse me, we're going to let Bennett in for the second time tonight. Hopefully he's able to get in and join us. All right. The RR 80, so rural residential district. It's once again, the purpose is really for low density residential, and it's to help protect rural areas by requiring large lot sizes. RR 80 is just under 2 acres. However, it is a little more permissive with respect to the types of principal residential uses allowed. In addition to single family homes, duplexes are allowed. As I mentioned, community residences are allowed throughout these districts, but this district also allows for congregate living facilities and convalescent homes. And a congregate living facility is generally speaking, it's a senior facility or some other type of assisted living facility that provides a range of living assistance. And a convalescent home, of course, is exclusively an assisted living type facility. So there are a few more types of residential uses allowed in the RR 80, but not many more. By example, attached housing isn't allowed, like multifamily housing isn't allowed. And what we'll see is, as I move on to the RR 40 next, it really looks a lot like the RR 80 on just smaller lot sizes. But when we take a look at the geographic extents of the RR 80, it covers very, very large areas of town. So this is like the GB 130. This covers much of your town. I mean, here we're talking about a third of the town is covered by this district. So really we have a third of the town where uses such as duplexes, community residences are permitted. The RA 40 is a residential low density district as well, but this is just under an acre. So it's a little more dense. It also allows for a range of principal residential uses, the same ones as the RR 80. So you have single family, duplex, community residence, congregate living facility, convalescent home as well. And what we see when we take a look at the geographic extents, it's a little more limited, the RA 40. Not a huge district geographically, but it is spread out across the town, but much smaller pockets. All right, moving down, we're generally moving in the direction of more higher density, is the RM 20. Now, the RM 20 is one of the more permissive residential districts with respect to the types of residential uses allowed. So here we have, in addition to all the uses that were allowed in the RR 80 or RA 40, it also allows housing for the elderly. And housing for the elderly is senior housing, basically age-restricted housing, 55 or 65 and older. So single family, duplex, attached housing is allowed in this district, which is most people would recognize as townhouse or condo. So that's more than 2 units that are attached in that fashion. So there's a wide range of uses, but still no multifamily type use, like apartment building type use. 20,000 square foot lot, a little less than half an acre. And this also is fairly limited in its geographic extents. This kind of orange hash pattern is the district. And there are just pockets of it spread out. So, excuse me. So that while this is a fairly permissive district, it covers a very small area of the town. And most of these areas are, for the most part, already built out. So unlike the RR80 or the GB 130, which can contain large tracts of land that are undeveloped, the land areas that belong to this district are for the most part developed. Now the RM15 is very similar to the RM20. It's just a smaller lot size at 15,000 square feet. It allows for all of the same use types. So wide range of uses on a slightly smaller lot. So these two districts, the RM20 and RM15, are what we see is that they're the most permissive with types of residential uses. And they allow for some of the highest density uses because of the smaller lot sizes and the allowance of things like duplexes and attached housing. Now, when we take a look at the geographic extents of this district, once again, it's very, very limited. Part of Mason's Island, some areas just on the outskirts of Mystic Village, out near just south of Pawcatuck, tiny little pockets which represent areas that are more or less developed already. So there are very few opportunities. So while you have these districts are permissive of a lot of different types of residential uses, they're very limited in their geographic extents, and the land within them is mostly built out. So there are very few opportunities for that type of development unless it's refill development, infill development, or a few vacant parcels here and there. Now the RH10 is really one of the highest density districts in that it only requires 10,000 square foot lots, and it allows for a very wide range of principal residential uses. Basically, all of the same ones are allowed in the RM20, RM15. So you have a wide range of uses and a very small lot. These areas are generally located within public water and sanitary sewer areas, which allows for that higher density of use. These are really village residential districts, Mystic and Pawcatuck, with really nothing in between. So they are fixed, for the most part, fixed to those areas. And similar to the couple of districts I just profiled, for the most part, fairly built out. So the new opportunities in these areas is infill development and redevelopment. Now you have a couple for a not a huge town. And we've talked about this before. You have a lot of zoning districts and a lot of residential districts. So you also have what are called the RA20 districts is the first one. Now, these are small lot districts, but they're very restrictive in the types of uses they allowed. Similar to the RC 120 or the RR80, these districts, this district and the next one I'll show you, are very restrictive, based just single family. No duplexes, no attached housing, no congregate care facilities, assisted living type facilities, no age-restricted senior housing. So these are very restrictive. They allow for higher density, but are very restrictive in terms of residential uses. And what we see is this district covers, a much bigger share or coverage of geographic area than the other two small lot districts that I just talked about. And they're at the fringes of our villages. So these are like newer area. I hesitate to call them new because they were developed 50, 60, 70 years ago. but newer areas being on the outskirts of both Pawcatuck and Mystic. The RA 15 is much like the RA 20 in that it's very restrictive with respect to the types of uses, just single family residential is a principal use. It basically just allows for a smaller lot at 15,000 square feet. It's about a third of an acre. And its geographic extent is very limited. A little tiny pocket, Mystic, little pocket, Mason's Island, Clark's Village, Pawcatuck. Built out like similar to these other small lot districts, for the most part built out already. So in summary, as we take a look at your residential zoning districts, they range from most restrictive with respect to the types of residential uses allowed to least restrictive. And on the most restrictive end are both large lot and small lot districts, the GBR 130, the RC 120, RA 20, and RA 15, which we just looked at, which only allow for single family and community residence. Now, when you shift over to the RR 80 and RA 40, you add to that, you can do duplex units, congregate living, and convalescent home. And then when you go to your least restrictive districts, the RM 20, RM 15, RH 10, you can add to that as well attached housing and housing for the elderly. The issue, which I mentioned a couple times now, is that those least restrictive districts on the right are small lot and for the most part, mostly built out. Most of the opportunities are somewhere in the middle or to the left in the GBR 130, RC 120, RR 80, RA 40 districts where there's undeveloped land. However, those districts are more restrictive in the types of housing that can be built. So as we have discussions about where the opportunities are for building housing that meets the needs of residents, that helps the town become a more affordable place to live or a sustainable place for families to live generation over generation. If we simply point to districts like the RM 20, 15, 10 and say, hey, these districts only require a small lot, you can do a range of housing. What we'd be missing is that those districts are largely built out and the development opportunities are in some of the other districts where there's undeveloped land. The balance that has to be achieved, of course, is that the value in protecting those undeveloped areas is directly linked with everything that we're trying to accomplish with respect to sustainability, resilience, and environmental protection. So, and with any recommendations that we might make for amending your residential and housing, residential districts and residential housing regulations, we need to be conscientious of the potential impacts with respect to conservation and your environmental resources. So it's an important balance that needs to be achieved. All right, let me pause right now to see if anyone has any comments or questions before I keep moving. And allow for me to have a drink of water. Ben, I see your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, I do have some comments on how I think we move forward with some of these districts, but I don't know if you want to wait till further on.
Yeah, no,
I don't know where you're going.
Yeah, let's have it right now. I don't mind taking a little break.
Okay. About a year ago, myself and let's see, 3 other former chairs of the PZC submitted a letter with some suggestions. It'd take me about a minute to read it if you'd let me, just to get it back into the record with some recommendations. Stonington is suffering from a lack of affordable housing options. There are many avenues available to this commission to help alleviate this problem. Changes to the zoning regulations that will allow added density and therefore more new residential construction in selected areas are a necessary step in this direction. greater flexibility in ADUs, such as elimination of ADRB review and even eliminating the need for an SUP would be a good start. Lowering minimum lot sizes in zones served by public sewer and water is another idea that has been discussed. We favor consideration of all these solutions, but fear that in some areas of town, all new construction that could otherwise ease our rental housing crisis will just be built out for short-term rentals. It is for this reason, therefore, that we're reaching out to the Commission to take action to rein in the growth of short-term rentals. We believe that the PZC could easily adopt new language as a text amendment that would ban non-owner occupied STRs in town while still allowing for owner-occupied rentals of any duration. These are a few of the ideas that are floating around at present, and I think it's obvious that we need more density in some zones that can handle it, that you say are already built out, and they are, but perhaps smaller lot sizes in the smaller size zones, the denser zones could even handle more density because they're served by public utilities. But I think we got to do something about short-term rentals. That's all I've got to say. Thanks.
Okay. Does anyone care to follow up on anything Ben said? Yeah.
Yeah, this is Ryan, if I may, and I'm not sure folks can hear me. And
Yeah,
I understand.
we can. Go ahead. Yep.
I understand the concern on short-term rentals. I know that's a very major topic and also a very charged topic within the town. And I personally think that needs to be really its own issue and discussed on its own versus what we're discussing here on the permitted residential uses. I think that would be best. In my mind, I think the short-term rental issue really probably needs to be discussed and then go ultimately to a town vote. Just my thought. But I think we need to focus here on the permitted residential uses and the restrictiveness and keep the short-term rental aspect of that separate. Just my perception.
Thank you. And thank you, Ryan. I've had similar discussions with Clifton and Chuck about this being a third rail issue. And we kind of came to that same conclusion that it'd probably be best to tackle that on its own and not have it, obstruct all the other work that we're trying to accomplish here.
Okay, thank you. And again, Penn Tamsky, I understand the concerns there, so I'm not trying to dismiss it. I just think it needs really its own separate meeting focus to properly address it.
Yeah, if I may briefly, I just think that it affects so much else that we could do, as we're addressing the residential zones and how we can perhaps make tweaks to the zoning on the residential zones to perhaps, give us some more density, allow for some more options. I just think it affects everything that we're going to do. I just wanted to make that very clear. Thanks.
Okay. No, I understand your position. Appreciate it.
All right. Anyone else care to ask a question or provide a comment before I move forward? All right. Let's move ahead. Okay, so when we map out the restrictiveness of your zoning districts, and so here we drop those individual zoning district colors and we instead group them by how restrictive they are. The red is most restrictive. The pink is somewhere in the middle, and the green is least restrictive. And once again, the theme here is that the green areas, the least restrictive areas, in comparison to the most restrictive areas, are a fraction of the geographic area. Not only are they a fraction, they are for the most part already built out. Unlike the most restrictive areas, which tend to have more capacity, more undeveloped land, so more capacity for growth. This very map, I think, kind of highlights why it is that maybe Stonington is struggling to keep up with the housing demand or the type of housing that it needs to accommodate current or future generations. is because really the opportunities are limited, and they're limited to fairly confined geographic areas that have few opportunities for new development. Okay. All right, now I'd like to talk about the bulk area and height regulations as they apply to the residential districts. And they are fairly consistent. So when we took a look at the numbers, we find that they're rational, consistent, with respect to least dense areas have the largest frontage requirements and setback requirements and the smallest floor area ratio. And as you get to the higher density areas, they require smaller frontages, smaller lot sizes or setbacks, and generally a much higher floor area ratio. And as a reminder, we've talked about floor area ratio before, about either supplementing that with a lot coverage limit or entirely replacing it with a lot coverage limit. But for the time being, this is what's in effect in your regulations. So this is what we will refer to. So once again, here, the most restrictive are that darkest pink is the GBR 130 and RC 120 in terms of least dense. More than almost 3 or more than 3 acres. Lot frontages that are about the length of the football field. Front yard setbacks at 75 feet. Side yard setbacks anywhere from 30 to 75 feet. Rear yard setbacks of 100 feet, length of basketball court, and height limited to 25 or 30 feet. And it's 25 in the RC 120, and I'm fairly certain that the origins of that are to help protect views of the coast, of the shore. So that is fairly restrictive in height as well, which limits the number of stories. The floor area ratio is pretty low, but if your lot size is big enough, you can stay within that. So we don't see that as the biggest constraint. It's really the big lot size. As we work our way down, the density is allowed to increase. So not only does the required lot area get smaller, as we all go all the way down to the RH10, it's only 10,000 square feet, less than a quarter of an acre. But the frontage requirement is smaller. The front yard and side yard setbacks are smaller. The height is generally a little more permissive. The floor area ratio allows for higher density, is more permissive. So, we don't see any kind of glaring inconsistencies with respect to some districts being way stricter than others as we go across this spectrum. But there may be opportunities to make some adjustments to these regulations to provide a little more flexibility in the build out of a lot, by example. Does the frontage really need to be 300 feet? Is the side yard setback really need to be 75 feet and the RC 120? Maybe it does. Nothing on this within these regs jumps out to me as out of place, inconsistent, or problematic. But we don't want to dismiss it outright as big fine the way it is and then march right past it when there may be some opportunities here. So that being said, I'm really going to try to draw some of this out of the community in our workshop next week. And I'd really benefit from hearing all of you. If you have any personal experience in trying to build something or know of people that try to build something where these regulations just seemed excessively stringent and prohibitive of something that was otherwise pretty good and would have fit right in. So with that being said, I don't know if anyone has any comments on these bulk area and height standards.
Yeah, just a quick comment. This is Bennett Brissett. I wonder, I guess it's for Clifton. I know obviously these regs were created back in the day, and we're trying to make, kind of conform things to what we can now. But obviously you want things to fit in with what they are in the neighborhood. I wonder, like, if we looked at these rules and did a layover of everything in those areas, especially in the more dense, how many things are non-conforming already. If you took a, I don't know, half acre lot that matched everybody else around there and put the new regulations on, would you be able to build a 10-foot by 10-foot shed in the middle? Or, obviously the old style, they used to build it, right on the road, which is, so if you build a new house on a lot, it would make it match, but, just try to kind of conform to the neighborhood, as well as not let, new monstrosities or anything like that go in.
Yeah, Ben, I'll say, this is Clifton again, thank you. I'll say that from our experience, at least, me for the past year in the town, and then just sitting down and talking with Candy specifically, and what she's seen over her, couple decades working for Stonington. It's usually those smaller lots that give us the largest problems in terms of inconsistency and nonconformities, because those are the more historic lots. And so when we see a redevelopment of a historic lot, say in the RH10 or RA15, those are the ones that, as standing now, are probably nonconformities. And if we overlaid these regulations on them, it'd be more difficult to build there. And,
Okay.
just
and I guess that's the.
I'd say just
Sorry,
from personal experience, anytime you run into bulk requirements or dimensional requirements that have seemingly arbitrary numbers, that's when, the difference of 2 feet, 5 feet, as we were discussing with buffers at the meeting last night, the difference between a 20-foot and a 25-foot buffer becomes difficult when, determining what you can develop on a site. So it's not that the bulk requirements we have are, necessarily bad, but they are just rigid. And so there are a couple items like RH10 and the minimum rear yard, with the depth requirement being a percentage. Sometimes the percentages are easier to work with. And I think I've mentioned that before, from an equity standpoint, is something that we could consider.
Okay. Thank you, Clifton. Anyone else, any thoughts or questions on these standards?
Yeah, Francisco, this is Ryan. I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah.
Was there any kind of formula that was used, or do we know if there was such a thing for the calculations on some of these? I'm just looking at the difference.
Yeah, could you repeat the first part of that? I missed it.
Sure. I'm just trying to understand, is there any kind of formula that was used to calculate these figures? To me, when I read it and I'm looking at it across the entire spectrum of it, I don't want to say it seems random, but I don't see a logic behind it.
Really the only logic is that there's an approximately or roughly proportional reduction with respect to minimum lot size. Okay. But I did do a little kind of back of the envelope math when we were considering what our maximum lot coverage should be. We took a look at FAR and lot size and all that. And there's no one formula that holds up, even if you were just around to the nearest 5 feet. Okay. The formula kind of ebbs, weaves all over the place here. So I think, a handful of people probably sat in a room and just said, all right, what do you think of this one? 40? No, it should probably be 30, right?
Okay.
It's likely the process. So a more rational way to go about it would be actually just run some math on that and see what the formula is or should be, and be a little more precise with this. But the real question is, maybe this calls for the need to have a fundamental discussion about why a backyard needs to be as big as it is, or why a lot needs to be so many feet wide. What is our concern? And some of the obvious ones are people have concern about overcrowding and nuisance and air and light and noise and that sort of thing. But to your point, some of these units, some of these spatial requirements are somewhat arbitrary.
Right.
Why is 40 feet of rear yard depth the right number in an RA 15, but in an RA 40, it won't work. It needs to be 50 feet. That's kind of somewhat arbitrary.
Right. Yeah, I guess I think that is definitely, like you said, I think it's something that larger kind of look at it should be done, because I when I think about this too, I'm surprised we haven't been challenged on, how did you come up with this? Why can't I do it X versus Y? What's the rationale?
The truth of the matter is in most communities, it looks exactly like this. It's a spectrum, and it's rounded to the nearest 5 or 10 feet. And at the end of the day, people are like, yep, that seems fair. That's really how it's done. And then it's just carried forward thoughtlessly, decade over decade. So here we have an opportunity just to give it some thought and attention, rather than walk right by it and say, it's been working fine for us. Let's not touch it. And
I agree. I think we should give it thought and attention.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
So in
yeah, this is
support of
good.
that, what we could do is we could come up with a table that is a little more scientific. If the lot size is this and the density is this, then where should these numbers really be so that it's proportional, to the foot or whatever. So we could do that just to compare. So I'll do that for our next meeting. And then in addition to that, what we might want to do is actually think outside the box or the table here and think about, do we really need to regulate in this way? To Clifton's comment earlier about percentage being maybe more equitable. Should this instead be percentage? Should there be a little more flexibility to allow for different conditions? So we'll give that some attention, and we'll come back to it at our next meeting.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
I think that's a great idea. Thank you.
This is Ben Philbrick. I agree with Clifton. I think either a percentage or make it much more formulaic as you're proposing, Francisco. So I think it's
Okay.
very much worthwhile to put it under the microscope for a little while. Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah,
very good.
Francisco, when communities are developing form-based codes, typically one of the things that they would do is they'll go out into a neighborhood with a specific zoning district and take averages of the setbacks of all the structures. And then they'll come up with either a percentage or a formulaic option based off that. And so, maybe it's way too early for us to even consider kind of doing actual field work in that manner, but maybe that's something that we can try to replicate between your office and mine and try to get some rough averages of what, structures in these districts are looking like, and maybe use that to come up with a formula.
Yeah, I think we could do that. And fortunately, we can do that, with GIS and aerial imagery and everything, so we don't actually have to go out there with tape measures. What might be helpful, Clifton, is if because I know Candace has probably the best feel for this, given the amount of time she's been working in the town and really handling applications. is if you could ask Candace, which one of these districts we have a lot of unconformities or a lot of applications that are constantly bumping up against one of these standards that they have trouble meeting? Like, which one is it, and which standard specifically is the most problematic? So if she could point us towards something, then we could investigate a little further by sampling some properties, measuring them, and see how they measure up.
Yeah, I'll absolutely do that. I can say just, I can guess that it's going to probably be the RA20 and the RA15 districts.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Those are the ones that seemingly are as old as the RH10 district in terms of, when those structures were constructed.
Yep.
But they're slightly newer, and so we have the provision that if a zoning district is undersized, and usually ones in those zoning districts are undersized, they drop down to the bulk requirements of the RH10 district. And so we frequently use that for development of those zones. But yeah, I'll ask her specifically, and we can maybe look at target neighborhoods or areas where she has seen that the most often.
That would be very helpful. Thank you. All right.
And this is Bennett again. I was just having a quick look on Route 27 near like Angie's Pizza and in the RH10 area, and just looking on the GIS, and basically all of them, are non-conforming because they only have 60 feet of setback. So I think it'd be curious to have a look at if you could make an average of obviously there's going to be exceptions, but of these areas now, what's the normal, and make something based off that, rather than just the numbers on a spreadsheet that we had before,
right?
Just so it kind of fits with the area.
Yeah, I think we'll try to kind of do we'll have to do kind of a sample size. Well, I'll check with some of our GIS folks here to see if there's anything they could do that would, where we could very quickly run some sort of process by where we calculate that. And in the event that we can't do that, because it's probably a lot more difficult than I'm thinking it is, and then we could most likely at least do some samples of areas to get an idea. Okay. All right, good. I feel like I've got some very good direction on this. I appreciate that. Okay, so here's the table, and then here's, once again, we map this too, so you could see how it lays out across the town with respect to most restrictive and most permissive in terms of bulk area, height, and the dark red areas are the least dense. So those standards are the most restrictive. And the green areas are the most dense in terms of what they allow. But as we've talked about, those green areas are largely built out already. Okay. All right. I'd like to very quickly talk about the principal uses that are allowed in the residential districts. I walked you through the principal residential uses that are allowed in those districts. But as I mentioned, there's a range of uses, actually a very wide range of uses that are allowed in residential districts. Some of them by zoning permit, others by special use permit, as indicated in the table. But you could see, everything from, well, we've talked about attached housing as a principal residential use. And as you'll see in the chart, it's only allowed in 3 of the town's districts. But agriculture, bed and breakfast facility, boating facilities, cemeteries, other institutional uses like places of worship, community centers, elementary schools, child care homes, golf courses, and if I continue to the next page, hospitals, lumber mills, manufactured home park, open space development, recreational facilities. I'm kind of bouncing around here. Wellness center, winery, yacht club. So there's a wide range of uses. I think what you'll see is that the more restrictive districts are the ones in the pink, right? You see all those dashes, that means no use is allowed. So the GBR 130, RC 120, the RA 20 and the RA 15 are all fairly restrictive of a lot of these additional uses. Whereas the RM 20, RM 15, RH 10 are more permissive. They allow for a wider range of uses, as you can see in the chart. And actually the most permissive districts with respect to the number and types of uses allowed are the RR 80 and RA 40. You'll see those allow for the widest range of non-residential uses in the residential districts. So I think you have a very healthy range of other than residential uses allowed in your districts. There's nothing as of yet that's glaring to me as being kind of oddly permitted, except for maybe hospital, which is allowed in the RR 80 and RA 40, and well, in the RM and RH districts. So I'd like to given what we have in front of us, open it up to some discussion or any comments you might have about the range of uses that are allowed in your residential districts, particularly non-residential, but also residential, and whether or not you think there are any uses that are currently allowed in these districts that shouldn't be allowed, or if there are districts or there are uses that are not currently allowed in any of these districts that should be. So that, with that being said, invite anyone to provide comment on that.
This is Ryan. I'm just kind of looking at this and thinking, I'm picking a few out because they kind of jump out to me.
Sure.
Nursing home or community center here, daycare center. I'm just thinking some of those, we have an aging population, you know, so I would tend to think maybe nursing home or some kind of elder care, you know, should be allowed in more of these districts.
Yeah, so here we have a convalescent home, which is allowed in five of the districts, but not in the GBR 130 or RC 120. Yeah, or in this, or in these two. And that the congregate living facilities are treated the same. These are different types of institutions or facilities, but they're treated the same in your zoning regulations.
Right.
We also have on the next, if I go to the next slide, housing for the elderly, and that's age restricted. So like an age restricted community, typically those are like small lot, single family homes or townhouses, condo type developments. Sometimes a large building in more of a multifamily or apartment building type format as condo or rental. But those are only allowed in 3 of your districts.
Yeah, and again, I'd question that. You know, what's the reason not in some of those other districts?
I can tell you that this type of housing is really very attractive to a lot of communities because housing for the elderly does not increase school enrollment. Therefore, you know, that's half or more than half of any given community's budget every year is school expenditures. And most communities are favorable to this type of housing because they meet housing needs, they get tax dollars, and they don't directly increase school enrollment. And the federal government, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, so you understand what this is all about. The Department of Housing, the federal government allows for the creation or they actually directly allow for the discrimination based in housing based on age and age specifically. So these types of developments have to strictly comply in terms of they have to file annual reports about the residents to ensure that they are in fact over the age 55 or 65, and there's certain proportions to that. So when you get one of these developments, 80% or more of those residents are going to be over the age of 55 or 65.
And the only other one that kind of just looking through residence duplex in some of the zones, it's not allowed, but then residence single family is allowed. So I don't understand. Is that just, more the number of people, in a single residence, the concern there, more of a density concern?
Yeah, I think so. We can't make the argument that's a density concern because the regulations as they currently stand require for a duplex residence to have twice the lot area of a single family residence.
Oh, okay.
So it's not a density argument.
Okay.
I think it's a character-based argument, property value-based argument for fear that duplexes in the GBR 130, RC 120 might not be consistent with the character of housing there or might devalue those properties. I'm not quite sure, why they're not permitted in the RA 20 or RA 15. Probably there's just not a precedent of them and an interest in keeping those areas single family only.
Okay. Yeah, I think just overall, I think there's some areas where you could allow some of these uses in some of these other zones, without a negative impact, I think.
Yeah.
Francisco,
Anyone
I
else
have a
have
procedural question.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
As we move into the, public workshop, we're getting into we're going to get into topic areas that become more emotionally charged as we start talking about residential housing.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the common comments against any sort of change in housing specifically, but then it'll bleed into commercial as well, is the concept of community character.
Yep.
How should we, as myself, staff, but also, the commission, navigate the conversation around character when it's a highly subjective topic?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not going to pretend that I'm the authority on this issue, but the way I like to manage those conversations is to first acknowledge the validity of those concerns. It's fair or valid to be concerned about the identity of your community or neighborhood and to want to protect it, what you feel is significant about it or what's crucial to its identity. So I think we first need to acknowledge people's concerns and the right they have to have that concern and opinion, and then try to move past or delve into exactly what does character mean to you. So, by example, the RA 20, RA 15, we could have a discussion about why duplexes are not appropriate there. And someone might say, well, it's just out of character with the area. We don't really have any of them or many of them, and it's inconsistent. So we could get further into that and say, well, it's just housing like everything else, and what's out of character about it? And one of the items might be is that, well, currently it requires twice the lot size, so you end up with this one structure that's a little bigger than everything else, and it's surrounded by all this open space and maybe more parking and all of that, and that's out of character. And that would be maybe a somewhat fair observation or assessment. So I think it requires us to dig deeper and say, well, then if we didn't require twice the lot size, we just put it on the same size lot as everything else, so it mixed right in. Would that be more consistent with character? And so I think we need to have those kind of conversations to move past the word character, which the legislature is telling us we can't use the term character, the notion character, as a basis for denying applications on character alone. We really have to define it and provide a much more specific metric or description of what we mean. And so I think we need to do that in conversations with the public, is get past the word and get into the specifics about what is it that you're concerned about, what's inconsistent. How do you feel that this will detract from the community? And I think it was Ben that had a hand raised.
Thank you, Francisco. I think we just have to accept the idea that the term character has been used for discriminatory purposes, and we just have to make sure that going forward that we're moving in the forward of less discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, let's just take character out of it, like the legislature's asked us to.
Yeah. And so the way we do that, I think, though, is not to dismiss it outright and basically tell people that we're not going to have a conversation about character, or you're not allowed just to point to character and be done. I think is to dig deeper and break it down and just get beyond the surface of that idea and ask people, what is your real concern? And expose that. You know, is the concern that you don't want other types of people living near you? Is that the concern? Or is the concern that you don't want a bunch of development because you like the trees on your street and you don't want them all cut down for development? Or is the concern that you're concerned about your property value being diminished because different type of housing is built next to you? I think we have to go below, and then we can directly address those specific concerns. And even potentially within the zoning regulations, if we do make them more permissive, we can put some other guardrails in place to ensure that neighborhoods and properties are protected. You know, by example, going back to the duplex example, if we were to reduce the lot size of a duplex to a normal single-family lot size like all other development, we could potentially put some guardrails around that to ensure that the property is developed in a way that's consistent with a single-family development. That it doesn't have a big parking area up front, that it only has one driveway like every other house, that you know, it's constructed in a way that it looks more like a single-family house and less like a cookie-cutter duplex you see all over the place. So I think there's some things we can do to address people's concerns, assuming assuming those concerns are not based in bias.
Yeah, thank you, Francisco. Sorry for opening that one up, but you know, ahead of the meeting next week, I think I wanted all of the commission, you know, to know that this is something that we need to remove, not from the conversation, but not as a reason for changing or not changing our regulations.
Yep, and I think, Francisco, your suggestion to essentially confront it head on and get it more exposed in the light, if you will, and let's really get down to what are the true concerns, you know, and define, you know, that kind of thing. It will be very, very helpful, I think, to allow us to, like you said, you know, to address some of the concerns specifically. Then your example with the resident duplex, perfect. You know, we could address things very specifically like that.
Okay, and thank you, Clifton, for bringing it up. I mean, that's why we're here, is to have those conversations.
Yep.
All right, there's construction that's beginning right outside my office window, so I hope that the noise stays at a manageable level. So if you hear something in the background there, I think they're starting to put in a water main. All right, let's keep going. We're about an hour and a half in, but fortunately, we're making good progress. We're getting close to the end of this. Accessory uses, much like your principal uses, there's a wide range of accessory uses allowed across the residential districts. And here, what we see is it's far more consistent, meaning basically wherever use is allowed, it's allowed in almost all districts and with the same permit type for the most part. So you see a lot of the same letters and symbols here across all districts, with a few minor exceptions, which I think all make sense or are reasonable. Accessory alcohol sales, that is, accessory use is allowed as accessory to a golf course only. Therefore, it's only allowed in the districts where you allow golf courses or have room for golf courses. So that makes sense. Private kennels, we're just allowing them on larger lot sizes, which seems fair, makes sense. If you're going to have a dozen dogs or whatever it may be, you should probably have more than an acre. And then finally, small wind energy systems, which I think is rational as well. It's only allowed on larger lot sizes where you're going to have wind and where it's not going to be a nuisance to a neighbor. So on accessory uses, I wonder, are there any accessory uses that are not currently permitted? And we talked a little bit about ADUs earlier, which are permitted, but it's restrictive. Are there any other accessory uses that are not currently permitted, but should be? Or are there any accessory uses that are currently permitted that are problematic, that are nuisance type uses in any particular district or setting? So that being said, Ben, I'm not sure if you have your hand raised again or was from before.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to go back to, just to reiterate, I think accessory dwelling units, I think to take away the special use permit requirement would be a plus. And that's all I'll say about that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this is the other Ben. I would agree with that too.
Okay.
We've got to loosen that up as much as we can.
Okay. Anyone else? This seems like an appropriate list to me. You can do, you have garage or shed, of course, home occupation. So you can keep some domestic animals, hens, minor accessory buildings, off-street parking, recreational facilities. This would be like tennis court or something like that. Special vehicle parking, we talked about that a lot in the phase one. That's like a boat or camper, swimming pools, that sort of thing. These all seem fairly consistent with residential uses. Okay. All right. So, this is the first time where I'm calling attention to this, and while you've seen this table before, you probably haven't thought about it too much, or any of the preceding tables. Like always, we're going to share this presentation after this meeting, and you can dig deeper into this and come back to the next meeting with any more thoughts that you might have. I do want to call attention to, I'm mostly bringing this to Clifton's attention, and Clifton, we could talk offline about this. But we did notice a small mapping error, or inconsistency, I should say. So the official zoning map has this one little area, and that is in proximity of Mystic Hill Road. I think that little subdivision is mapped on the official zoning map atlas as an RA20, is labeled as that, but it's mapped, the color code, the symbology matches the RM15. And we go to the GIS viewer and it's RA15. So we've got 3 different districts it could be. I believe the GIS viewer is correct because we checked the property cards and the property card said RA15. But we're making a note of it, and I just want to bring it to Clifton's attention. This might be something Candace has known for a while. But that's...
Yeah, I'll look into it.
Just this one area is the only
you.
inconsistency we saw. One of the things we'll be doing in the course of this phase of the work will be updating or adjusting the official zoning map as needed. By example, if we were to change any district boundaries, merge any districts, we're going to need to remap that, and also to review the map for consistencies. And this is, to date, is the only issue that we have identified. Okay. So let's talk about the workshop. So we just got through all of the work I wanted to conduct on residential districts for now, until we come back next month and I come back to you with some of this homework that I promised to do. The workshop next week, we've conducted a similar workshop before, a few months ago, on sustainability and environmental resources and resilience. And so we're looking to conduct a very similar type meeting. It will begin with a presentation, and the presentation I will give will be very similar to the one that I gave you this evening. Is I'm just going to walk people through the residential districts, what they allow, how they differ, where we see some of the opportunities, where some of the constraints may be. In addition to that, we need to provide a framework or guidance on this process in general. So we'll give them the basic introduction to our process, where we're at in the process, what this update is all about, and lay some of that groundwork. And then we've got an interactive survey for them, and I'll walk you through some questions we have and how we're going to do that. And we used this type of survey at our prior workshop. It's where we hand out the clickers and people are allowed to vote in real time. And I think those are really effective in getting people engaged. And so we're going to use it again. And then, just like the last workshop, we'll go to breakout sessions. And like the last workshop, we'll have 2 sessions. Each one is 25 minutes. We'll have a report back period of 10 minutes where each table kind of presents what they talked about. So we'll have those back to back. That'll get us all the way at 8 o'clock, where we conclude at 8 o'clock. So start at 6, finish at 8. My team will be there. Clifton, my team will be there. We'll be there at 5 o'clock to get set up for it. So survey questions. Here is where I'd really appreciate any ideas you might have for rewarding these, or really adding questions to this. So this is the interactive survey, the clickers. And so the way we ask questions, it needs to be yes, no, maybe, I'm not sure, that sort of thing. We have a limited number of choices. These aren't, as part of the interactive survey, these can't be open-ended. So I've got a list of 10, but I'm happy to grow that to a list of 15, or drop some of these, or reword some of these. And we don't have to get it all figured out now. But if you all have time to review this presentation over the next few days, get back to me with comments by like Monday next week. It'd be appreciated. So the list of questions I have, I'm really trying to probe here into, how things could change, or how well things are working with respect to regulation of the residential districts. So do the existing zoning regulations adequately and appropriately regulate, need to take the D off of that, regulate development in the town's residential districts? Does Stonington need more housing? Does it need to allow for a greater diversity of housing types? Do you need more housing for seniors, such as age-restricted housing, assisted living? Should a higher density of housing be permitted in village areas or other areas that are already highly developed? So more housing where you currently have it. Should the development of housing in coastal areas be more restricted? Should the regulations be changed to allow for the development of more ADUs? Should more housing be built as part of mixed-use developments? Should the town allow more multifamily residential, like apartment or condo buildings? And should 2-family homes really require twice as much land as a single family? So that's a short list. Does anyone have any comments they want to throw out right now? Strikes you right away. Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't want to keep beating a dead horse, but that at least I'll be brief about it. Why not ask the question about short-term rentals while we have the opportunity? Touch the third rail. It won't.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to focus on it. I don't want to focus on it in the workshop, but I think at the same time, it's not going to be, I don't think it's going to distract from what we're trying to accomplish if we ask one question.
Isn't this going to be an opportunity to gauge the public's point of view?
Does anyone have any other thoughts on?
Yeah, this is Ryan. If I can, I think, and I understand the desire to want to ask that question in this context. I think, though, the crafting of the question would have to be very, very considered. You know, and you're saying the clicker really only gives you a range of options, right?
Correct.
To respond.
Correct.
So that's where I have a concern there. You know, I think people are going to have some very, very detailed views on it, and they might not fit in the yes, no, maybe kind of context.
I'll say that if we do ask that question, Francisco, we just need to make sure that it doesn't make its way into the breakout session.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point.
And so I think we can, you know, as Ben is saying, that, you know, we can touch the rail and, you know, get an assumption of what the community's concern, or if there's a concern on the topic, which I assume there is. But as long as that doesn't bleed into the breakout session, then I'd be fine asking a question on it.
Okay. Anyone else on that topic?
This is Ben Philbrook. I would agree with Clifton that I think it's worth, and Ben Tansey, worth getting into these questions. It's just going to be very tricky how to ask it without whacking the hornet's nest entirely.
Right. Okay. Okay. All right. I'll give some thoughts on. Yeah, go ahead.
And I've mentioned it before, is community wells, community septic, is that something that should be worked in here somehow?
All right, you want to talk about that a little bit more? Like, should the town be more permissive of the use of community wells and community septic in developments? Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, would that allow more density? Would that allow more housing on a subdivision or something? I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
Okay.
Maybe it all would end up in ledge light slat, but I think it's worth the town trying to alleviate that. So
I think the real question there, Ben, because that kind of gets into just technical stuff. You know, I'm not sure how many people really understand what a community well is and a community septic relative to a private well or public system. Maybe what's really behind that question is, should the town allow for higher density development outside of public water and public sewer service areas?
There you go. Sure. Yeah, that's a better way to phrase it.
You know, if on-site systems can provide for wastewater disposal and drinking water, you know, that more of a higher level question.
Well, that's why you're the professional. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you came up with the idea for the question. I don't have it on this list, so it takes a village. All right. All right.
Francisco, I think with that too.
Yeah.
Sorry, dog barking in the background. With the density question, could we potentially ask a couple questions to quantify it? Like, what does more density mean?
Okay. And so how do you think we could get at that with like a survey question with a handful of choices for answers?
I'm just, you know, I'm thinking that when we ask question like number 5, where it says, should a higher density of housing? I worry that the immediate reaction might be no.
Okay.
But there might be a layer of, do you consider density to be 4 or more units in the same structure?
Oh, okay. So what is density? Let's define density first.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what actually I'm thinking, and I don't know if it would fit into this kind of question, but would even pictures of what we'd say, you know, we consider this dense versus
you're
something visual.
you're jumping on to the next part of this. So let me move right on to that. So the next part of this is a visual preference component.
Perfect.
And
Perfect.
so the way this
Segue.
works is we hit them with images, about 10 different images or a dozen, whatever it takes, of different types of housing at different densities, townhouse, duplex, apartment building, and nothing that looks like it would never ever belong in Stonington. And so this, I just grabbed a bunch of images from we have like an image library of these to populate this. So I still need to curate this for our interactive survey. But basically we put up a full screen image of one of these pictures and we have people rate it like from 1 to 5, 5 being the best. How do you think this type of development is appropriate somewhere in Stonington? How appropriate, 5 very, 1 not very, not at all. And so we're just get their visceral reaction to some of these different development forms and densities, housing densities. So that's the second half of this survey.
That's great. I think that'll really, I think, get some good feedback, kind of quantify some things for us.
That makes sense to everyone?
Yes, it does.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, good. So then we go to our breakout sessions. And session 1 is going to be more of a discussion or conversation where we really want to get at these issues. Like what is your vision for the community with respect to what housing looks like, what your neighborhoods look like, what the town looks like. And so we probe more into these questions, like should Stonington accommodate a larger population? Like yes or no, pro-growth, anti-growth, keep it like it is. What type of housing do you need more of? What type of housing do you not need more of or not want more of? What are the recurring issues? So we'll have 25-minute discussions surrounding that. We'll document it on flip charts, bullet points to these items, and then try to craft that into a vision statement that describes that group's vision for housing and residential in neighborhoods and residential districts in Stonington, over the next 10, 20, whatever years. Okay. The next one is a mapping exercise. So we'll have a map of the town. The zoning map shows all the residential districts. And then here we're trying to ask people to really focus on areas of town and pinpoint areas. Where are the areas that should be like, leave it alone or don't increase density, and where are the areas that have the real opportunities? Let's point to them on the map. Let's circle things. Let's X things out. Let's get people thinking geographically about where the opportunities are in Stonington. Okay. So that's it. That'll fill 2 hours fairly easily, I think. All right. So our next steps are to continue our preparation for our workshop next week and to continue our review of the residential zoning districts, take all the direction that you gave me this evening, follow up on everything we talked about doing in support of moving this forward. We'll come back at our next meeting, which is now only 3 weeks away because we're a week late at our meeting this week. So that'll be on April 24th at 7 p.m. And we'll get right back into it. We'll start with a recap of what we heard from the workshop. That will hopefully give us some additional direction. And based upon the feedback we received at the workshop, my team will do some follow-up work on that as needed. Then we'll come back with some ideas as to where we should be focusing our efforts over the next 2 or 3 months. Okay?
Sounds great.
Ambitious.
Yeah.
This whole undertaking is ambitious.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Well, thank you, everyone. That concludes our meeting. And I beg someone to report back to Chuck that I concluded 18 minutes before 9 o'clock.
We'll make sure that
verify.
gets to him.
I'd like to credit that to past overrances and potentially future overrances if possible.
Oh, no. Oh, no, not future.
No, there will be no future overrances. All right, thank you, everyone. Look for the presentation. It'll come your way by tomorrow. And thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you, Francis.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Francisco.
Yeah, you're
Great
welcome.
job.
Thank you.
Francisco.
Good night.
Thanks.